Hello everyone, my name is Brendan from Digital Mint. You're watching Tutorial Tuesday, where we're going to continue on our journey to becoming the Avatar. This time, we're going to get into water. Actually, that's a lie. We're not going to get into water just yet. That's going to be next week. This week, we're actually going to go and set up our scene in 3ds Max so we can just drag and drop everything in. We're going to set our stuff up for photorealistic rendering. This will probably take, hopefully, a half hour, if nothing goes wrong. But we're going to run through that. We're going to show you guys how to get some spherical maps, which we will need for this video. But no worries, we got you covered there. I don't know, we're trying a new technique here with the camera. We're going to turn that off in a minute, though, so we can see exactly what we're doing. But just in case, there's also a chance I'm considering, instead of uploading these as videos only, I may actually end up streaming Tutorial Tuesdays in the future. So it'll be a setup pretty similar to this, actually. If that's something that would be interesting, of course, leave that in the comments below. But of course, these videos are probably also going to be available on demand whenever you need them on YouTube. But I mean, that's a possibility we may end up doing that in the future. Anyways, we're going to get right underway here. So before we can actually get out there and send everything into 3ds Max, we're going to need our plate that we're going to use when we go into animate our 3D geometry in water. Now, what we are going to do is we'll go back to our bending comp. All right, here we go. This is what we have so far. So we've got our fire and our air. We're eventually going to go onto this water that we start to do right there. All right. Just going to back out of this here. I'm going to go to our bending. I'm going to solo this layer. And we'll drag our work area out. And so our bending is going to start, let's say we start right here. I'm going to hit B to begin my work area here. And then up here and whoosh, and then there, and then dunk dunk for Earth, right? So this is all the stuff that's going to be 3D, because our 3D stuff is going to be our water and our earth, which are bending that we're going to get into the next few weeks. So with that, we're actually going to take this and we're going to go add this comp to the render queue, and we're going to set this to a JPEG sequence. We're going to export this out as an image sequence so that we can open it up inside of 3ds Max when we work with it. This all looks good. All right, all right. And then we'll go find our folder here. Go to our plate sequence, which is going to have obviously the sequence for our plate. I'm going to save that here, and we'll just render this bad boy out. And this will also save our frame numbers, which will be useful later on. Alright, so now that our render is done, we're going to go jump into 3ds Max. I'm going to be using 3ds Max 2015. You may have a newer version, 2016, maybe an older version, depends what. Also, great news right now, if you are a student, Autodesk does let you license this for 3 years for free. So if you're learning this and you're not sure if you want to commit to learning visual effects, great, you get a chance to try it out for free. All works out nicely. I don't know if I've received insider info. I don't know how long they're going to continue that program. They may switch over to a subscription-based model, and this is going to be, this licensing is going to be done away with soon, so get it while you can. Anyway, here we are in 3ds Max. I'm just going to go save this back to our folder here. I'm going to name it Scene Setup, because right now we're just setting up our scene so that we can essentially just drag and drop stuff in there, and it'll all sit and look the way it should. We're going to hit M on the keyboard. That's going to bring up our material editor. Right now I have the slate editor open. I'm going to go to Maps, Standard Bitmap, and we're going to do the same thing. We're just going to go back out. We're going to find our image sequence. We're going to import it as a sequence, so make sure you check this guy right here. And we're going to open that. It's going to go 0 to 160. So what this will do is this will actually play along with us. Now, right now, we're going to hit 8 on the keyboard, which is going to bring up our environment and effects tab. And we're going to take this image sequence and we're going to drop this right in here as an instance. Let's double click this, and it is a screen environment. This is not a spherical environment. We're going to get to that in just a minute. Now, our last thing to do is going to be to change up our viewport settings. So we can go viewport background right in here. We can configure our viewport background. For right now, we can use the environment background. We will have to come back in here later on and just change, but for right now, we're going to stick it as an environment background. Hit OK. We're also going to go into our render setup. Right now we're going to bring our output size to HDTV. For right now we'll work in 1280 by 720, and then one other thing is we're going to be using the mental ray renderer. So if you do not already have that set, you just go down to the bottom of your common window to assign renderer, and I'm going to use NVIDIA mental ray. Now mental ray, not quite industry standard for most things, but it's a really good introduction to unified ray tracing rendering. Plus it's free, it comes with 3ds Max. So again, no cost, and it's a great tool to learn on, and does actually yield some pretty great results. So now that everything's set up, we can hit Shift F on our keyboard, and that is going to get our safe frames right up here. And then we can also hold down Alt and the middle mouse button, and we can move our grid around. We're actually not the grid, but we're moving our camera around, which changes up the grid. Now, aligning this is going to be a little bit tricky because we don't have all too great perspective cues here. So what we can do is we can try. I may actually end up going back on this. Sorry, not motion capture. Perspective match, and we're going to show our vanishing lines. And what this does is it allows us to align our camera based on the perspective lines within our scene. Now, I tried to do something similar for this for our original shot. This may not actually work, and we may go with a different method for aligning our camera, but this is our first step towards creating, towards getting our scene to match our actual camera. Now, looking at this, isn't quite going to work as well as I thought it would, because yeah, perspective cues don't have many great perfect buildings to work with. If we had like a lot of perpendicular lines in our scene, this would usually work pretty well. In this case, we're going to go with a slightly different strategy. Instead, we're going to hit Alt W. That's going to minimize our window here, and let's just create a new camera. All right, so we'll make a free camera. And we'll just drop this guy in our front viewport. Hit W on the keyboard and move it back a bit. It's kind of tough to see what's going on here, so actually get our perspective. I'm actually just going to move our perspective back around and maybe even realign that to the front so it's not all sideways. Alright, so I had to do a little bit of quick research right there. We were using a Canon T5i to shoot this, and that is a camera with a crop factor of 1.6 for its sensor, and we actually took a picture. We shot at 24 millimeters focal length, but that is actually going to convert to 24 times 1.6. That's going to be equivalent to 38.4 millimeters in for a standard 36 millimeter camera, which this is not because of the crop factor. But when we are using our camera here in 3ds Max, we're going to make sure we set that to 38.4. So we're going to go back in here, go to our camera, go to modify, and we'll just set this guy to 38.4. All right, so that's going to match this. Our camera is also roughly a meter off the ground, maybe even just a little bit more. Now our grid is 0.5 meters here. I'm actually going to bring this guy up right about there, I think. It's pretty close to where we're actually at. And take this guy. We'll also go into our camera settings. We'll show our horizon. Actually move this guy from perspective. Look through our camera. This actually seems to be getting pretty close. Horizon line right through the middle seems about right. Maybe that is just slightly, maybe the horizon line should be just slightly down a bit more. So actually unsnap that, and we're actually just gonna rotate this guy up just the slightest bit. right about there. Hit W on the keyboard again to go back to the move tool, and we'll move this guy back. And we'll maybe even offset it so the origin of our scene is right here by the feet. Now the other thing to keep in mind is right now our scene scale is, we want to try to get that as accurate as we can. Right now our grid, one square on the grid is 1/2 meter, and this bottom part of this guy here is about 1 meter long. So if we look at the line that matches up with that, 1/2 meter, meter. So that's about 1 meter on there too. So we are pretty well aligned here. Ideally, if you can write down, the more information you can write down on set, like for example your focal length, the distance between things, especially the height of the camera off the ground, those can really help you align your scene. But this is going to get us pretty close for now, actually. So our next step is going to be to create our ground plane. Now what we can do is we can actually do something pretty similar to what we just did with the pool, except now we're actually going to do this inside of our camera view. Hit Alt W. So it's going to actually match it to what the camera sees, not what is technically the exact geometry. We could have done that with exact geometry, and that would have been actually probably the preferable thing in this situation if we could get our camera just perfect. Right now that's proving to be difficult, however, so we are going to do this instead. We'll actually start right at the back here. We'll actually outline coming from the top edge of this pool. So I'll do something like this. Try to just hit all these edges here. And of course, this will be drawing within our ground plane. And I know from experience the pool actually starts to curve right here, so I'm going to drop a point there. And I'm just going to do my best to estimate where it is right here. And again, this isn't even super important. You can actually rough this out if you want to, and it's not a huge deal. So now we're going to use this along with another spline. We'll actually make a rectangle, and we'll send this rectangle from back here, and we'll extend it out so it just, if you look down the bottom right perspective window, so it just goes down beyond the edge of our camera, and also so the edge is just outside. So right about here is pretty good. Go back into our modify, and we can actually see how far we can shift this over. Here, so we'll put this right about in the middle, and then we'll hit R, and then we'll scale that on the X, so it just creeps in, just so those corners are just out of the edge of the frame. And also our back line towards the back here should just sort of touch the bottom of this wall. And then the last other thing we can do is we can actually worry about that in just a few more minutes. Our next step is we can go to our, select this guy, original pool outline. We'll even name this pool outline. And we can go to attach, and we'll attach our bigger rectangle around the outside of that. And that's going to put this all onto one spline as named pool outline. Now, what we can do is we can go into our modifier list, and we will put a bevel on this guy. That's going to turn this into solid geometry. It's going to fill in. It's going to fill in from the outside, and then it's going to stop around this inner spline. That's how spline additions and subtractions work. And what we can do is keep our start bevel at 0, and we'll bring our height down about 1.25 meters. So we're actually going to get down onto the surface of that water around on this inner side here. And then what we can actually do from here is we'll take this whole thing. We will right click, we'll turn it into convert to editable poly. And what I want to do is I want to take these edges. Can I ring this? No, it's not going to work if I ring it, is it? It's going to get confused. Okay. Actually, we don't even need to do that. We'll take this guy, we'll actually convert, we'll hit P on this to go to a perspective view. We'll go to our back here, take this guy, we'll extrude this out, maybe about this much. We'll go to the top of this guy, and then we will extrude to this one, and we want to extrude this out until we hit the top of this wall here. So this will just catch a few of those other projections, because what we're going to do to get proper reflections in our scene is we're going to project our plate onto this geometry. We can hit the polygon to exit our sub-object mode. And what I'm going to do is go back here. I'm going to hit Alt-X, and that's going to make this a see-through object so we can see a bit more of our background and what we're working with here. Now that we've got this guy, the last thing we're going to do, we're actually going to go back here, back to our sub-object mode. This time we're going to go to border. Actually, before we do that, we're going to take this bottom face, we're going to delete it, we're going to take our border, and we will select this bottom edge, we're going to hit cap, and what that's going to do is that's going to put a polygon right here, and that's going to pretty much close out the projection on our ground where we have this inset for the pool. So as we project things, that's where they will end up. So now we're going to get into some of the fun stuff, the rendering. Now, we're going to go to our material editor, so we're going to hit M on the keyboard. That's going to bring up our material editor. And then we have this map one. We're going to rename this. We'll name this our plate SEQ for plate sequence. This is going first off into our environment channel. And actually, speaking of our environment channel, let's actually open up a rendered frame window. All right, render from the camera. We'll lock that to the camera. Just take a quick look at this. So here's what we got. Here's our geometry. Yada, yada, yada. Nice. So what we can do now is we can go into materials, mental ray. We're going to make a new matte shadow material. So what this is going to do, this is going to allow us to catch all our mattes, or catch our shadows while not actually rendering physically into the scene. So we actually put this on our camera mapped background, and then we apply this to that ground plane. What you'll see when we render this is, this isn't actually going to show up in our render. So we no longer see any geometry here. And in fact, it is there. So this is basically, what it's doing is it's projecting our image from our camera onto our geometry. So this is going to allow us to not only, using that matte shadow material to catch our shadows, it's actually going to, objects in the scene that reflect or refract any light are actually going to reflect and reflect the projections on our geometry. So this is going to give us pretty realistic reflections and refractions. And this is one of the big things with a lot of the water bending effects you'll see online. Is a lot of them are actually done in After Effects using like a CC Mr. Mercury effect. However, you can't do actual true photorealistic reflections and refractions using that. So doing this in 3D with 3ds Max using actual 3D geometry gives you, first off, like, you get a much more photorealistic look if you set up your materials and your rendering and everything properly. But it's also going to actually interact properly with your geometry that is in your actual scene, and that really just gets everything to look right. Looks much better than like just applying a CC Mr. Mercury effect to a layer in After Effects. It gets you something that looks really nice. Of course, we're going to continue that next week after we set up our scene. We're going to get through the rest of this as quickly as I can. I did spend a lot of time with geometry and camera alignment, but I'm going to try to move on from that real quick here. So our next step is going to be setting up. Actually, what should we do next? let's actually just show how this would, for example, work. Let's actually just go Materials, Mental Ray. Let's make a Arc and Design material. We'll double click on this. We'll actually go to the template and we'll just select a chrome metal. Bring this over here. We'll go to our we'll deselect our polygons. We'll go to our create menu and we will create geometry. We'll create a geosphere. We'll put this just right in our scene. We'll actually say base to pivot, and we'll say radius of 0.5. So it's essentially a sphere that's like has a radius of 1 meter. All right. And now that we've done that, we will apply this material to that sphere. And now, assuming I didn't screw anything up along the way, when we render this, yep, okay. So I did very much screw something up along the way. I know what it is, no big deal. So actually, we're gonna go back into our material editor, and this plate right here, we actually need to send this through another node before we put it in our camera mapped background. We did not actually camera map this and project it. So we're going to go to Maps, Mental Ray, and we're going to do Environment Background Camera Map. We're going to reroute this into our map for our environment camera map, and we're going to reroute the output from this node into our camera mapped background. Now it's actually going to properly project our scene. So if we hit render again, what you'll actually see here is this is our ground that's actually... So reflections off of this chrome ball are actually hitting our ground and our reflections. Now back here, our environment map isn't sorted yet. So up here, this is outside the edges of where we're actually projecting things. And of course, it doesn't look right because we haven't gotten to that point just yet. Don't worry, we will. But this is essentially what it's doing. It's also going to, once we get around to it, it's going to catch better. It'll end up catching better shadows as well once we set that up. And actually, I don't remember right now whether I used an image-based lighting system for lighting or if I used a daylight system. I'll go back and check the original project once I find that out. But before we get to that, we are going to set up the rest of our environment. And to do that, we are first going to start off by taking an environment map. This is a spherical environment map. So this is an equirectangular. And actually, I'm going to roll the segment right now about how you can actually create these guys. In the case that you do need to get one. They're pretty easy nowadays. You can do them on you can actually just get them on your phone. All right, everyone. So my good friend Brendan told me you guys needed help figuring out how to get your spherical maps. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the Google Camera app if you're on Android, or if you're on iPhone, I believe the app Photosynth will do just the same thing. If you come to the app right here, you're going to have your options, your normal camera options, some other cool things you can use, but we're going to use the photosphere option. And what this is going to allow us to do is it's going to allow us to capture a full 360 panorama, including sky, ground, everything. And this is what we're going to be able to use back when we're in 3D working on our stuff. We're going to be able to put this as our environment map, and it's going to catch any reflections that don't hit any of our projected geometry. So we're just going to go through quickly how you do this. Is you're going to have your image here, and you want to basically just put everything inside this blue dot. So if I just start here, it's going to think for a minute and grab a picture, and then we just work our way around to each of these. Yeah, if we can get even like more over the shoulder. That'll work. So we're just going to go all the way around like this. And what the camera's going to do is it's going to get pictures from all these angles. And eventually, once we get all the pictures, it's going to stitch them all together for us. This looks good so far. Matching up quite nice. We might have lost a little bit there. That's okay. And now, we've made it all the way around. Now we're going to go up. Get everything up above. And pretty much this is the strategy. We just keep doing this until eventually we cover everything. And then once we cover everything, the phone will stitch everything together, assuming nothing goes horrifically wrong. And we will have a full 360 spherical environment that we can use for 3D. Get our sky, in this case the palm trees up above. Alright, and now that we got all that, we go down, we get our floor. Nice, looking good. It's not going to be entirely perfect, but it really doesn't need to be. It just needs to be close enough that it'll catch any reflections that miss our reprojected geometry. No, I think we'll get a bit of you guys in here. That's okay. Don't worry about it. Oh, okay. Well, it's kind of confused now, probably. But whatever. And then just get the floor there. Nice. If you can just sort of stay out of it. And then we'll get that last little bit and bam. Alright, so it's going to capture that. It's going to take 2 or 3 minutes while it stitches everything together. And then once it does that, assuming everything goes well, you're going to have a nice 360 spherical environment that you can use for compositing. So that's how we do it. We're going to go jump back into 3ds Max, and we're going to show how we can use this to actually regenerate our environment in 3D. Cut. So I didn't quite mention it before, but after you get these maps, you can actually view them in the phone. So actually just in the camera app, you can actually just swipe right. Then you can actually bring this over, tilt it over, and then if you hit this little world icon right here, that'll bring you into the full panorama mode, and then you can actually hit the little compass. It'll actually use the gyroscope in the phone. You can actually look around like this. So just to see if your map came out well. This one came out a little weird because we did have Adam standing here for one of the pictures, so we get sort of ghosted in there. But I mean, look around at the ground, look up at the sky. That's the general idea. So you can use this to like look around, test it out, and then we can also use this when we composite our images. Really, the only thing that they aren't so great about is they are not in HDR at the moment. So they do not have a whole lot of dynamic range. So if, for example, you do, and they actually do have a good amount of dynamic range, but they come out as JPEGs. They don't actually come out with, you know, the full, like really full range of color. But as a map that's used to catch all the reflections, here's what we use them for actually. What it'll do is it'll actually catch all the reflections that don't hit some of our reprojected geometry. So, for example, this stuff over here, it'll actually replace those reflections with the environment map. So for any reflections that don't hit the ground, they're gonna catch that. We can also, in the future, we can also make just a simple object for this fireplace here. So this will actually project a bit better, and it'll actually look a bit better in the reflection. So we're gonna set that up right now. So we're going to take this, we're actually just going to drag and drop that into our material editor. Go here, we'll set this as an environment map, and we'll set it to a spherical environment, which is what it is. One last thing we can do, we can set the U tiling to -1. So it's actually going to be a reflection. And then we have to align this to our scene. So we're actually going to go hit 8 on the keyboard again to bring up our environment and effects. We're actually going to drag and drop this guy. Ooh. Drag and drop this guy into the environment map slot as an instance. Hit OK. And now we're starting to see what's going on here. This is a little strange. Let's see what happens if I render this right now. So our map is actually quite dark at the moment. Let's see. Is that actually? It is actually pretty dark back there. But first we do need to just align it a bit better. So for example, this wall should line up with this guy right here. So our horizon lines essentially need to match. So if we go in here, we can actually do the V offset. We'll actually bring this down. Try -3. That may actually be the wrong direction. No, it's the right direction. It's just a bit too far. Set our quality down for 1 so we can just really bang out these renders. Let's try -1 for the UV offset. Alright. And again, it doesn't need to be perfect. This map is really here to just catch all the reflections that don't hit anything that's reprojected in our scene. And the one other thing I might bump up, I think I'm going to bump up the brightness on this guy as well. So if we go down to our output section of this map, I actually might just bring up the output amount to 1.5. Now it is a bit brighter. It does match a bit better. I mean, if you do have objects in your scene that are super reflective, you probably will be able to notice, if you look closely, the seam between, you know, our geometry that's projected from our plate and the geometry and the light that gets caught by our environment map after the fact. But for most things that aren't like super reflective, like this chrome ball we have just for testing purposes, that's not going to be a terribly huge deal. Now to set up our actual render, because if you notice what we have here right now is everything that's being projected onto that matte shadow material shows up as our original plate, and everything that, wherever we don't have one of those matte shadow materials, we're actually catching everything else. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to switch everything up so that way when we actually render, our entire image has our actual plate background, but our reflections are going to get caught when we bounce light off things instead of interacting with that screened background we had before. So right here, I'm going to make a new map, mental ray, and it's going to be an environment background switcher. We're going to take our environment plate, plug that into background, and take our environment map, put it in our environment reflection slot of our map here. And then if we press 8 again to bring up our environment and effects, we'll take this background switcher and we'll put this into our environment map slot as an instance. We'll hit OK. Now you will notice in our viewport background, we do lose our plate, but if we render, we're seeing our plate as our actual background in here. Now again, lighting, this doesn't quite sit. We're still missing some shadows. We'll get to that in just a minute. First off, we are going to fix this, though. So we're actually going to hit Alt-B on the keyboard. And we're going to switch this to Use Files. And we'll hit Animate Background. And we'll go to Files. We'll hit that. Sequence. You know what? Maybe we'll just go 0 to 160. Start this guy at 0. Bam. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah? Yeah. Okay. So, for future reference, I made this mistake. When you are importing stuff, bring it in at 0 to 160. We're not going to keep frames constant, because that just turned out to be way more confusing than it was worth. So 0 to 160. And then when you configure your time to 0 to 160. And then in your viewport background, 0 to 160, start at 0. Alright, now that we have our settings straight, let's close this out. Alright, my friends, the last step, now that we've set up all our reflections and refractions, is to, of course, tackle our lighting. Now, in this case, you'll notice it was a cloudy day right here, so a rare cloudy day in Southern California. Now, generally, for most instances, you are going to want to use the daylight system, which is a combination of a sun and like a sky system for lighting. In this case, that doesn't always work the best for cloudy days, so instead we opted to use image-based lighting. So that same spherical map that we got for our environments and reflections, you can actually also use this for image-based lighting. So I'm actually going to we're going to connect one of these into a color correction node. We're also going to go create lights, standard. We're going to make a skylight, and we'll just drop this guy, like say over here, for example. Go into the modify tab. We could use the scene environment. However, we're going to switch it up a little bit. And instead, we're going to plug a map into this. We're going to plug our color correction node that we made. Plug this into our map for our sky environment. We'll go into here, and what we want to do is we want to make this a bit more contrasty so that we're pretty much only seeing the sun or the sky, really. Because what happens when you have a cloudy day is your light gets very diffused. You'll notice I don't actually, well, it's hard to see now, but I don't have an actual shadow other than just a bit of ambient occlusion because the light is just coming from all around. The sky basically acts as a giant soft box whenever it is a cloudy day out. So we're going to bring up our contrast. So we're not going to be getting light from pretty much anything that isn't the sky. Also drop down the brightness. So pretty much all of our light is coming up from the sky here. Now what we may actually do is pull a bit of saturation out. And let's just see what happens if we render this right now. Now one other thing to notice for future reference would be because the environment maps do have a bit more, they do have a bit more dynamic range than, say, just the image that comes straight out of the camera. So you'll notice that here we actually see the clouds, and we actually get a bit of blue sky. We don't really have that in the sky for our actual plate. So if you're super concerned about getting this to really sit, I mean, you could always go back and maybe bump out a bit of the contrast here. But you will notice we do have a bit more noticeable shadows, and these actually do follow a bit closer to what happens. You'll notice that we get a bit of a longer shadow coming out this way, and in the shot the sun is actually coming from up here. So, but again, also we do get that soft lighting, which is important. We can even turn up our soft shadows precision. Let's actually render out our region. We'll render out just this ball right here. Now one other thing to keep in mind is as we do go around tuning this, we do want the color down here to be pretty much equal to the color down here, or the brightness down here, as we try to match our scene. So right now, if you look at the data for this image, which you can do by right-clicking on the frame buffer image, you'll see our mono channel down in the bottom left sits around 1600, 1700. Over here, we're sitting about 2000, maybe even a bit higher depending on where exactly you go. So what we can do to make this a bit closer to what we're actually getting in our real life image, we can actually, I think, you might want to turn up the multiplier just a little bit on this, but what we're also going to do is go into our material editor, and we'll go to our matte shadow material, and under the under the shadows options, we have receive shadows, and then our ambient intensity. We can bring this down, and that's going to darken those shadowed areas. Let's see what happens if we render this again. Nice. And so now, even though we did actually turn up the intensity of our light just a bit, we're now seeing our shadows did get a bit darker in some areas. Depends exactly where you sample. And obviously it is kind of a rough guesstimate. And of course, I mean, obviously feel free to just use your eyes, and you can even see the brighter the white here, because this is the alpha channel, is actually going to mean the shadow is slightly darker. So we did darken the shadows up just a little bit. I may even go probably even darken them up just a little bit more. So now this really sits in there once we get the shadow. In fact, that's probably even. That might now be even a bit too much. So I think looking back here, not very much there. But I mean, that's how you fine-tune your shadows. Obviously, if you're working on your own image, it's going to be a bit different from this one. And keep in mind, if you do, if it is a sunny day, you're probably better off using a daylight system. For example, MR Sun or MR Sky for your options there. And then again, to adjust the intensity of the shadows, same thing with the matte shadow material. You will have to adjust your exposure controls if you are doing that, though. So just keep that in mind, and I'm sure we'll go over that in the future at some point. But for now, I'm going to stick with this. And that actually sits in there pretty well. And now, I think just to get a little bit more stuff in here, I'll actually make a box. What I'm going to do, put this guy around here. Make this like roughly a 1x1 box. And then bring it up a bit. And Alt-X so you can see through it. And now let's right-click, convert to editable poly. Select this top polygon, hit R for scale, and we'll scale it out. And then we'll get out of sub-object mode, hit M on the keyboard, take our matte shadow material, drop it on here. Alright, so that's how you're going to set up your scene, how you composite everything. I hope you guys learned something here. That is not at all what I wanted to do. Oh my goodness. No, cancel. Don't do that, please. Actually, we can even do some more fun stuff here. So once you actually set this up, now that you're all set up here, you can actually just start like messing around with these. Here, so say you got a bunch of spheres and you're just like, you know, I just really feel like having a whole lot of spheres, you know? Because, you know, maybe that's your thing, right? So just, you know, you get a bunch of spheres, and then you say, yeah, let's even make this one a bit smaller. Let's make this one 0.25 for your radius, you know? Maybe even come in here, bring it back, put it in the middle, you know, and then maybe even just go into your materials and say, you know, let's make this one pretty simple, you know, give it a nice matte finish. Drop that on there, and then, you know, next thing you know, you're being chased around by a bunch of giant marbles. Now, I actually did a video about this once. Back in high school when I was first learning this, I'm like, you know, I wonder what will happen if you just... Because, I mean, I basically spent the entire time figuring out, like, all this environment matching and everything. By the time I was done, I'm like, you know, I never really learned how to model anything. But one thing I do know is how to make a bunch of big chrome spheres. Actually, what happened to this guy? That's really weird. But anyways, you can look at this. This is kind of neat, though. You can see like the reflection of the spheres within each other, and that's that's like, you know, the really cool stuff that you get with ray traced rendering. Oh, you know what I just realized? I know just what's going on here now. It's actually picking up. This stuff is actually being projected onto the rear geometry. That's why it's funky. Anyways, that's your basic introduction to ray traced rendering. So like, even look at this stuff. Like all these reflections will bounce between these objects, and you get all this stuff. And actually, it's pretty neat, especially when you're first figuring it out.